Yeah. Ha! Yeah, I'm so special, I'm so special, I'm so special, so special, so special. I'm like Ichigo, master in a red suit. This my Bankai form, I'm about to let loose. Better make your next move your best move. Straight out the gate, niggas gon' hate and try to test you. Watch who you with, who your mans, who you next to. If you take a hit with son assist like a nephew,
you can never check us. Homie, this a chess move. Wrote this on a little short bus, I'm so special. If Mav say get him, I'ma get him. Ain't no talking when I pull up. Park up, hop out, run down with my hood up. Now what the fuck are you hating for? Can't DFG get money anymore?
Trapper turn smack rapper. Only smack rapper that you know is smack rapper.
Yeah, you come from a long list of Democrats.
Yeah.
As far as family members, and what was your reason for switching parties?
Yeah, I grew up the center of the Democratic Party. So my family came over here in 1848 during the potato famine, when the potato famine in Ireland was wiping out the Irish population. People were eating grass. A million people died. And then a large part of the population immigrated to the United States. My grandparents on both sides came over that year in 1848. They landed in Boston, and they had no money, they had no jobs, they had no homes, and it was the Democratic Party that met them on the dock and took care of them. So our family, ever since then, has been immersed in the Democratic Party. It was the party of the poor, the party of working people, party of labor unions,
Right.
a party that protected vulnerable populations. And my great-grandfather was Honey Fitz, who was the first Irish Catholic mayor of Boston. On the other side, on the Kennedy side of the family, my great-grandfather was Patrick Kennedy, who was a state legislature Democrat and a boss of the Democratic Party in Boston. And their kids were all Democratic leaders. My uncle John Kennedy was the first Irish Catholic president of the United States. My father was Attorney General, Senate. He was assassinated running for president of the Democratic Party. My uncle Ted Kennedy was I think the second longest serving senator in the United States Senate. 50 years he was in the Senate. And I worked on, I was at almost every Democratic convention since 1960. I was at the center of the Democratic Party. I participated in hundreds of elections. Beginning with my uncle's election in 1960, I ran my Uncle Teddy's presidential campaign in the southern states. And I could not imagine that I'd ever leave the Democratic Party. I run for president, and as a Democrat, just like my father did, against a sitting US president, mainly because I was concerned about the war, and I was concerned about the censorship that was now, and the surveillance that was emerging now. And I'm very worried about my country and about the future of democracy, and that's what prompted me to run. And also because I'm concerned about health of children and the deteriorating, this explosion of chronic disease in our kids. When my uncle was president, 6% of American children had chronic disease, 60% do today. It's no country in the world is as sick as our country. And as our children are getting wiped out, 77% of American kids are ineligible for military service because they're either obese or they have chronic disease diagnosis. And it's now, when my uncle was president, zero was spent annually on treating chronic disease. Today it's $4.3 trillion. It's 5 times our military budget. It is going to bankrupt our country. Our kids, the sickest kids in the world. The reason we had the highest, during COVID, we had 16% of the COVID deaths were here in the United States. We only have 4.2% of the world's population. And the people who were dying were all sick from chronic disease. The CDC said that the average American who died from COVID had 3.8 chronic diseases. the reason we did so bad is we have chronic disease like nobody else in the world has. Fertility is dropping in our children. Teens today have 50% of the testosterone and 50% of the sperm count as kids did a generation ago. Girls now hit puberty at 8 years old in our country, so as young as 8. The average is 10 to 13. 70 years ago, it was 6 years older. Our kids are hitting puberty younger than any children in the world. So our fertility is dropping, the kids are fatter, the depression, the mental illness that is now exploding in our country is all related to chronic disease and to our food, to poisoned food.
Mm-hmm. How do you connect this to the Democratic Party?
Right, so those are the reasons I ran.
Right.
I ran in the Democratic Party. But then my father ran against the sitting president as well, running against a war. And I thought, we have a primary process. If I lose the primaries, I will continue to be part of the Democratic Party. But then they blocked me. They started canceling the primaries. The Democratic Party adopted 60 rules to prevent me from running. Even if I won the primaries, I could not win the nomination. So, for example, one of the rules they adopted was that any candidate, I was already campaigning in New Hampshire and doing really well. What they adopted a rule that said that anybody who campaigns in the state of New Hampshire, who sets foot into the state of New Hampshire, that all of the delegates that they win will go to the president. Oh, it was just fixed.
Right.
And they started canceling primaries so that nobody could win except for President Biden. And, I was saying, let's debate. If President Biden had stepped out and debated me, people would have seen back then his disabilities, and they've been able to have a democratic process. That's not what happened. So I then, when I was the last one on my campaign to say, okay, I got to leave this party because they're not going to let me win, and they've rigged it. So I switched to independent, and I campaigned as an independent. From the beginning, my supporters mainly were Trump supporters. So 57% of the people who were supporting me said that if I left the race, they would vote for Trump. So I was harming Trump. I wasn't harming the Democrats. But Trump was always very civil to me, and he did nothing to stop me from participating. But the Democrats came after me. I wasn't allowed to go on TV, which is, the networks that are controlled by the Democratic Party, ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, MSNBC, they wouldn't let me on for even any kind of interview. When Ross Perot ran in 1992, he was only running for 10 months, but he had 34 interviews on those networks. I only got 2 live interviews the whole time, 18 months that I was running. And then they were spending tens of millions of dollars. They wouldn't give me Secret Service protection, even though there were incredible threats on my life, like real threats, people coming with guns, with fake federal ID, trying to get at me. In one case, I had 4 break-ins in my house. I had one guy who made it to the 2nd floor of my home when my family was home. And we gave a 68-page report to the Secret Service saying,
What happened in that ordeal?
In those cases,
Were you in the house?
I was not home. My wife was home. She one day was doing her podcast, and she saw a guy come over the fence. And I was paying my own security. Mm-hmm. It was costing us about $1 million a month, because when they travel with you, you have to buy hotels for everybody, and every other candidate gets Secret Service protection.
Right.
But I was at the White House. President Biden made the decision to deny me Secret Service protection. Right. So because they wanted to bankrupt me, they wanted to hurt my campaign. They were paying tens of millions of dollars to sue me to keep me off the ballot in all the different states, and I had to go get on the ballot. I couldn't raise the kind of money they were raising because they wrote the rules so that parties, if you're Republican or Democrat, you can get $750,000 per person. you can go, there's no, the maximum limit is 700, somewhere around 750,000. So they could go to big donors and get all the money. My maximum was 6,600, less than 1/10 of what they could. So I could find people who wanted to give me money, but they were legally not allowed to. So my ability to fundraise was much less, and they were trying to bankrupt me. And they were bankrupting me by suing me in every state. And they were bankrupting me by denying me Secret Service protection. Now, when my dad ran in 1968, candidates were not entitled to Secret Service protection until you got the nomination. So after the convention, my dad was assassinated in June 5th, 1968. And at that point, the White House, Lyndon Johnson, who he was running against, provided Secret Service protection for all the other candidates, including George Wallace, George McGovern, Hubert Humphrey. All the other candidates who were running got Secret Service protection.
Right.
And Congress passed a law saying that if you meet certain metrics, you are entitled to Secret Service protection 120 days out. But the president can allow people before that, if they're credible candidates and if there's threats against them, to have Secret Service protection. So, for example, Jesse Jackson got full Secret Service protection 300 days out. Shirley Chisholm got full Secret Service protection. Gary Hart, Obama got Secret Service protection more than a year out. My uncle got Secret Service protection, Ted Kennedy, 550 days out by a president who hated him. But at that time, it was considered, that's what you do. Right. We're America.
Right.
You don't weaponize the federal agencies to go after your political opponents. But what they did is they weaponized the Secret Service. I'm the first candidate in history to request Secret Service protection and be denied. They denied it to me 6 times. The first time. It's never happened before. Oh, but they were taking all these steps. But then I saw I saw what the Democratic Party was changing, and that it had changed dramatically. It now became the party of war. So the Republicans, weirdly, are now the party of peace. They're trying to end the Ukraine war, which is a war we should have never gotten into.
Right.
They became the Democratic Party I grew up with. It was the party of free speech that protected civil rights, constitutional rights, the Bill of Rights, the U.S. Constitution, including the First Amendment, freedom of speech. Without that amendment, without freedom of speech, you have no other freedoms, because a government that can silence its opponents has license for every atrocity. Right. Democrats always knew that. My father was in love with the First Amendment. My uncle, they thought we should all have debate, conversations. My uncle won the campaign because of the debates, and the Democratic Party canceled the debates. And they also became, they were the party of tolerance. They became very intolerant, and people don't like Trump, and I understand that. But the 80 million Americans voted for him. And if we just become polarized and start hating each other, our country is through. Mm-hmm. So, and then the Democratic Party became the party of the rich. So they're big pharma, big tech, big ag, big food, the military-industrial complex, and Wall Street. Those are their donors, and they are, and the Democratic Party represents their interest. Mm. The Republican Party has become the party of working people, of the poor. At the Republican National Convention, you had Sean O'Brien, who's the head of the Teamsters Union, the biggest union in this country, talking. This never happened before. At the Democratic Convention, right, Kamala gave this incredible speech that was all about war and belligerence and world domination, and right before her, the person who spoke immediately before her was Leon Panetta, the head of the CIA. This has never happened. The Democrats were always suspicious of the CIA. Right. And military generals talking. You had endorsements like Dick Cheney and John Bolton, 50 CIA agents who endorsed the Democratic Party.
Is there a correlation?
The neocons, which are this group, that has always been Republican, right-wing Republican, Dick Cheney and John Bolton, They're the ones that gave us the Patriot Act, the surveillance state, the national security state, the torture, the extraordinary renditions, all these things that happened after 9/11. They they gave us the Iraq War, which is the worst foreign policy catastrophe in American history. Dick Cheney still thinks that was a good idea. He thinks the Patriot Act is a good idea. He thinks censorship is a good idea. And he endorsed Kamala Harris, not because he has changed, but because the Democratic Party has changed. It's become now the party of the neocons. Well, for me, it was absolutely heartbreaking. My wife, at the beginning of the campaign, said, I can't be married to you if you support Dick Cheney. And I knew that from the beginning. I mean, if you support Donald Trump at the beginning, but by the end of the campaign, Trump called me the night that 3 hours after he got shot at Butler. And he said, I want to talk to you. And I went and met with him in Minneapolis. And he said, the issues that you're concerned with, I will end the war on day one. I will end it on day one. He said, we should be friends with the world. And this is what my uncle said. My uncle, President Kennedy, said the primary job of a president of the United States was to keep the country out of war. He didn't want little children in Africa and Asia and Latin America, when they heard about the United States, to think of a man with a gun. He wanted them to think of a Peace Corps volunteer. He wanted them to think of the Kennedy Milk Program, which gave nutrition to tens of millions of kids around the world who were hungry. He wanted them to think of USAID and the Alliance for Progress, which were the programs he created to give aid directly to the poor in foreign countries rather than to give it to the military juntas and the oligarchs, which was the target of all of our aid before that. Right. And so this was what the Democratic Party believed in. And Trump said to me, those are the things I believe in now. I want to solve the health crisis for our kids. I want to make America healthy again. I want to end the censorship. I want to end the surveillance. I want to have I want prosperity for the working class. In 2020, when I was a kid, the Republicans owned all the money in this country, and the Democrats had union people and working people. In 2020, roughly half the country voted for Biden, and roughly half voted for Trump. Half that voted for Biden own 70% of the wealth. So they have all the billionaires. The half that voted for Trump own 30% of the wealth. So it's the Republican Party has now become the party of the poor. You've had this extraordinary inversion, and most Democrats do not realize this yet. They still think the Democratic Party has all of these traditional values that I grew up with and that I loved. But it's now become the opposite of that. And
when you see former heads of the CIA speaking with the Democrats, did that disturb you?
Yeah, I mean, you and I talked the last time about the assassinations of my uncle, which was clearly a CIA project, and my father, which was almost certainly a CIA project.
I figured that was very alarming.
That's part of it, but also, the CIA traditionally was forbidden from spying on Americans or propagandizing us, and and today that rule no longer applies. Mm-hmm. So the CIA is now doing in this country what it has done in countries all over the world, which is which is mischief, fixing elections and fixing the press to propagandize Americans rather than foreigners. That was always legal for them to do that. Right. They're now doing it here in this country, and it's very alarming to me because, Matt, we're living in a time right now where you're seeing the emergence of these new technologies that are potentially surveillance technologies, AI, which can warp our perception of the world, change the way we look at the world, and manipulate us in ways that we don't even understand. Yeah. That can manipulate truth and twist it. Facial recognition technologies, which are all over the place. low-level satellite. You know, we all carrying GPS on us right now.
Yeah,
You know, on our phones, our watches, our cars. Government has the ability to know where we are every moment of the day. That should scare people. They also can listen to us. You know, we have Siri and Alexas in our homes. We think it's working for us.
No.
It's not. It's working for Bill Gates. Every time you call, I mean, I remember 3 years ago, I was with my wife lying in bed at night and saying, we need a new mattress. The next morning, we both got 3 mattress ads on our cell phones, right? And that was when I really said, oh my God, these things are listening to it. And of course, we all know this now, right?
Right.
But that information, of course, is being harvested for free by large corporations, then monetized in order to turn us into, you know, permanent consumers and consumer slaves to them. But it's also all being stored and compiled by government agencies. And, you know, Americans always believed the government should not be spying on them. That was very dangerous. That was a feature of totalitarianism. And then the Democrats openly began endorsing censorship. So I have an injunction right now against the Biden administration for censoring me. And it's a federal court injunction that's been repeatedly upheld. And there's a 155-page decision by that judge, a federal judge called Judge Terry Doty. And he details, now we know from discovery and from the Twitter files and from all of these documents that have been released, 37 hours after he took the oath of office, swearing to uphold the Constitution of the United States, President Biden's White House began telling the social media sites, you have to censor speech, dangerous speech, misinformation, disinformation from my political opponents. Facebook, we have all their emails now. The executive of Facebook began talking to each other saying, this is illegal. You have the White House ordering us to censor political opponents of the president. And they said, and you know, as a result of that order by the president, they took down my Instagram account. Right? YouTube is going to censor you if I talk about certain subjects on this.
I know.
Right? So, and the White House told them to do that. That was an order from the White House to YouTube. So we're all now being affected by that. And the Facebook pushed back on my Instagram. They said they took it down for misinformation, but Facebook was saying, you know, there's actually everything he wrote was true. They couldn't point to a single post that I did that was factually incorrect. Everything I put up, I was very careful, was cited or sourced to a peer-reviewed publication or government database. And they had to make a new word up, which was called malinformation, which is information that is factually true, but it is nevertheless inconvenient to the government. Malinformation. So they were censoring me for misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation. But the only thing they really had on me was malinformation because they didn't have any factually incorrect statements. And the Facebook people were talking to each other saying, this is not right, but we got to do it because the White House, you know, is going to take away our immunity from liability. And so I got censored, many other people got censored. People who were talking about medical policies, people who were critical of them, doctors, scientists,
I'll be honest with you. I was doing a reaction to the presidential debate. And I was voicing, you know, my concerns. And, you know, when you go live on YouTube, hopefully this doesn't get me shut down for good. Hopefully, right? When you go live on YouTube, you can see the amount of people that's there watching the live.
Yeah.
In a split second, it went to 0.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay,
Yeah,
that's
I think you should even stop talking about this now.
Yeah.
Why you giving me mixed signals? Let's be honest, you want some dick in or you don't? I don't know. Baby, you got what I need. I'm just a fuck out of here. Stop